Hi again, everyone, and welcome to Building Reboot, episode 4. Today, we're lucky enough to have Louise Swann from the building business with us. Now, Louise is an analyst with a science background, you can tell I'm reading this, who has the expertise in policy work and science education. For the last decade, she has worked in the building regulation in central and local government and the private sector, and this has enabled her to develop a comprehensive knowledge and a unique set of skills. Prior to establishing the building business, Louise's work included providing training on the Building Act, resolution of leaky building claims, economic assessment of the cost of leaky buildings, determinations rider, and policy development. So today we've asked Louise to talk to how we can shift our thinking and culture as an industry to be more focused on delivering buildings that perform, as opposed to covering our ass and avoiding as much liability as possible, and then whatever building comes out the other end, that's what we'll put up with. I'm hoping her talk can help us rethink some of the fear-driven decision-making that we see so often, and help us find a safe way to kind of push the envelope, be creative, and deliver internationally leading results, as opposed to always being behind. I mean, wouldn't it be great? And if a few years, the Europeans and the Americans were looking at New Zealand going, oh gosh, look how great they build buildings over there. Great quality, they're building them quick, it's efficient, you know, all of these things, as opposed to us always looking at them and shaking our heads at our own industry. And we know it's expensive to build in New Zealand. We know it's hard. We know there's all these factors. But we need to put our hands on our hearts and admit that there's some stuff that we're contributing here as builders, architects, product suppliers, merchants, everybody in the picture. So with that said, I'm just going to get Louise to pop her mic on or camera on. There we go. And I will hand it over to you, Louise.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. First webinar I've ever done. And I've done a bit of a presentation, so I will just share my screen, which has my presentation on it, and now I just need it to, sorry about this, go to full screen mode. So there we are. I think we started. Great. So look, thank you very much for tuning in. I know it's a really busy time because plenty of you hopefully will be going back to work next week, but I hope that the things that I cover are in actual fact more action focused and things that we can all do. I did want to just spend a couple of ticks going through what the past presenters have said. There's no doubt there's going to be a pretty tough time economically, but you know, it wasn't without some glimmers of hope. And Cameron Bagri, in his inimitable style, talked about hunters and the hunted. And in his definition, the hunters were the ones that would drive their market share, and that seemed to me a pretty good place to be. And so you might notice that I've called this presentation Hunter Behaviour. So it's really about what we can do to drive our market share so that there's going to be some winners and there's going to be some losers in tough economic times, and we will want to be a winner. Other key messages I heard about internal was getting your house in order. If you're an economist, you'd call that microeconomics. Thinking about cash flow, liquidity, efficiency, being mindful about what you're spending, particularly the discretionary spending. Make sure every dollar you spend gives you bang for your buck, so to speak. And then from the customer-facing perspective, to build their trust. Create efficiencies so that they can in their own way have an efficiency because you're efficient, and of course be driven about quality. You don't want to deliver a service or a good that fails so that they've got to come back to you. So I just want to get you to imagine what life would be like if we drove instead of this view but with this view. So, you know, imagine if you're sitting in the car and that's the view that you had, how would your driving be different? Well, I've got no doubt we'd all drive an awful lot slower. We'd drive quite hesitantly. We wouldn't really know where we were on the road. We wouldn't really know what was ahead. Hey, we might even go back to the beginning and employ people to walk in front of the car with a flag so that at least if we hit into somebody or something, at least we could blame them. So at best, we'd get pretty ordinary driving. It would be expensive, it would be bureaucratic, and it would be pretty slow. And I know you're probably thinking, what on earth is she rabbiting about? But this isn't that far a way of thinking, because that's exactly how we work currently in the construction sector. We are obsessed with leaky buildings and the history of them. We're obsessed about the earthquake and the history of them. We're obsessed about fires. We're obsessed about litigation, and we're obsessed about how councils behave. And so basically what that happens is we're so busy looking over our shoulder that in actual fact our construction sector is expensive, it is inefficient, it is bureaucratic, and you can never achieve excellence if you're performing in that way. So what we've got to do is we've got to move from this view to this view. So no one's suggesting that we don't want to learn from history and take on those learnings, but you can't let history dominate you to the point that you can't be focused on performance. So for my presentation, what I want to kind of do is divide it into a couple of sections. The first section about how as we as businesses can provide our customers assurance of performance so that it will reduce the size of the rear vision mirror for them, and then the responsibilities of a customer to make sure that what they're being told is also correct. You know, it's that due diligence checking. So first of all, I said I was going to look at it from the perspective of providing assurance to your customers, and I want to look at quality, evidence, and documentation. The reason why I look at documentation is that in my experience of building defect claims, whether it be about leakies or earthquakes, the inadequate documentation always became a bit of a winner for lawyers. So the first thing I want to talk about are building product suppliers and manufacturers. And the first piece of information that I think you need to have is a summary of all your key assurance information. Now, you will see that we call it a PAS at TBB for Product Assurance Supply Statement. MB has coined the term Product Technical Statement. But whatever it is, it's got to have a purpose. Now, the purpose for you is as much marketing as it is technical, because when you're writing your purpose, you need to think about what is your market you want to supply. Is it all external, or do you want to be able to supply it internally? That sort of thing. You need to describe what the product is, plus any additional componentry that you want to supply with it for its installation. The scope and limitations of use, I think, so you might say it's any building, and a limitation might be a building height. Then the next thing, we've got conditions, and they're rules that don't apply to the scope. So they might be something about the competency of an installer. Then the next thing we talk about, the performance characteristics, building code related, non-building code related, but remember to make sure that all the performance requirements have been covered. That covers off your purpose, your scope and limitations. And finally, you've got your the basis for your assurance. So, you know, we absolutely strongly advocate that all of the information you've relied on is listed, that it's accessible, because I've never seen a piece of evidence that is commercially sensitive, and also make it easy for people to access it, for instance, by putting a QR code or something like that. The other thing is, stand behind your assurance statement, sign it, version control it, and have a date on it so people know that it's relevant, it's current, it's not one of these dead documents that we see on lots of people's websites. Not really trying to advertise, but there are lots of companies out there that have already taken the step to provide an assurance statement. And if you go to our website, which is down the bottom, then you can see all of those. You'll see that over the period of time, we've continually improved, and the QR code, for instance, a relatively new development. So yeah.
Can you? I know you've got your notes on in front of you, but they keep getting picked up on the mic.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You just take them to the side.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. The next thing I want to talk about are building product supplies. Giving design related, glue laminated, and it's very. You know, we thought about how could we help the user, and a worked example. You know, I know you have span tables out of 3604, but when my business partner Kevin was trying to teach me how to use them, I realized they were confusing. So we just created a simple, active that you just go through quickly like that, and it shows you how to use it, and then you can, you know, so it's actually about thinking about the audience to make sure that their design information you're giving is useful. The next thing relates to installation. Now, frequently we see installation that is so wordy. We think it should be visual, and you can see for this one client, we replicated details out of an acceptable solution, and then we blew them up. So less about words, more about the visuals. These are all the sorts of information that a product supplier and manufacturer needs to be able to provide to their customers to provide that trust and assurance that the product is going to be fit for purpose. You can see I've also got on this slide, make it obviously easy, you know, plain English. The other thing is about a warranty. Whether or not you craft a warranty, one still exists. Whether it's under Consumer Guarantees Act in some situations, or whether it's under the Commercial and Contracts Law Act, doesn't really matter, it exists. So what we say is provide a warranty because it gives confidence to the market that you believe your product performs, and it also sets your own rules about your requirements for customers. The next thing I want to talk about are designers and architects. If I remember back to the Hun report in about 2004, I think it was, they concluded that one of the problems that gave rise to leaky buildings was the loss of clerk of works, that there was no one person on site that was taking ownership from the building. One thing that I've seen in the last however many years it is that we now no longer have the equivalent of a clerk of design, if you like, because what I see now are designers and architects calling on engineers to do a bit, waterproof suppliers to design their part, cladding people to design their part, and there's nobody that is actually, if you like, keeping the picture of the system. Now, in 2010, the then Department of Building and Housing created this thing called a design summary, and you can see down the bottom of this website, of this screen, I've got the link. I would encourage designers and architects to start using it. It's a really good tool, and it actually makes them think about each section of the building, how it's going to perform, how it's going to meet the performance criteria of the building code. So that's an action that designers and architects could start tomorrow. Builders, now I know that lots of builders out there are giving 1,000 photos to their clients and are trying to, in addition to doing a good job, they're trying to give a record of construction, whether it's on a memory stick, whether it's on a, you know, in the old days, a floppy or whatever. But, you know, what I'm saying is get a business advantage out of here. Make your template and then actually only provide meaningful information. Now, I just quickly mocked up something here to show that you would have, if you're going to do a photograph, make sure it's actually a meaningful photo, list where you took it, what it's showing, and the date of that photograph. And then if you attach to your report the assurance summary from the tanking supplier or something like that, you've given your customer assurance that you've used the product correctly and that you checked beforehand that that product was going to be fit for purpose. So I'd encourage builders out there to start thinking about how they can tell the story as well as doing the story. Yes, that gives assurance to customers, and also don't forget it does manage your risk. You know, I just want to remind us about what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to move from this to this. We're trying to shrink down the rear vision mirror. And so now what I want to talk about are behaviours of customers. And so I do want to go over checking that a product's fit for purpose. And to be honest, people that need to check that may be designers and architects, maybe builders. They're even going to be DIYers. And so you can see here, Maglock, we created a pass for them, and you can see they've got the purpose, what it is and what it's used for. The next thing, we cover off a description, and so that when you're looking at it, you know that the product that you've got looks like the description. Scope and limitations, what we try to do is make it in a logical way so you can say all building uses, but there are some limitations. You'll notice there are no conditions, that it's decided that, you know, that the skill required, you don't need training, something like that. With the performance characteristics, you can see that all of the performance characteristics are there, and you know, if they've covered off structural integrity and B2 durability. As a customer, when you're going through this, sorry, I've jumped over myself, not wanting to move my bits of paper, is as you're reading this, you should be saying, the purpose they've supplied it for, is that my purpose? The scope and limitations, does that fit what I'm going to do? The performance characteristics, is everything there that I need? Has the person thought about the structural integrity of the product that I'm going to use, which is B1? Have they thought about whether or not this product's going to be durable, which is B2? So it's both of you working together, the supplier telling you something, the customer reading and thinking, is that the right product for how I want to use it? The next thing, as a customer, you might say, okay, yep, they've got a whole load of source of information. It looks pretty good, looks pretty comprehensive, but actually I want to see if it's worth anything. And so I'm going to download it, and look, they've done a QR code for me. And so that makes it really simple. Then the next thing, so you might say, well, actually, I want to use it as an acoustic floor. So therefore, I'm going to specifically look at the test that relates to acoustic flooring to see whether or not there are any provisos that I need to think about. With the sign confirmation, is this company standing behind this product? Well, it's been signed by somebody that's got, as David Heaney, who used to be, it's version controlled, and you can see that it's got a date on it. So, you know, don't just pick up a pass, don't just pick up a brands appraisal or a code mark certificate and say, oh, they've got one of those, good to go. Read it and see if it's relevant for your project. So on this thing, I want it all to be about action, because over the last 4 weeks, we've seen what 5 million people can achieve. And yes, there are some people that saying what we're doing has been ridiculous, and other people, you know, you're always going to get disagreement. But, you know, I do think that we have lowered the death rate, and we have lowered the getting sick rate, if that's the right term. So therefore, even if 10,000 people in the construction sector, they say roughly there's about 250,000 involved. So let's say we got 10,000 people doing some of these actions, you will start to see a change. So if you're a building product supplier, start making sure you've got information, start having it correct, start making sure it's evidence-based, and start making sure that it's fit for New Zealand. Designers and architects, re-establish ownership of the building performance as a system. Use the design summary. Builders, if you don't get some sort of piece of evidence that shows the product you're using is fit for purpose, why use it? You know, if we think about plasterboard, if you're not seeing a document from a supplier that says that this is the basis that we're saying that it's fit for purpose, why are you using it? And I've also got a message for industry groups. There are a whole load of industry groups out there. We've got the Registered Master Builders Association, Certified Builders Association. We've got those 3 design groups. I look at what the training they provide. And I'm saying, give different training. Give members training on how to do due diligence. Give members training on how to prepare better documentation. And more importantly, change the rhetoric from liability, risk, and last man standing, and all of that negative stuff, all of the stuff that's in the rear vision mirror, and start talking about performance. Start talking about success rather than being focused on failure. And the next thing I want to talk about are companies that might be platforms that store information, or they might be merchants. And I've also, you'll see I've included Codemark and brands there, because in a way they are also a platform for providing information about a product. So have a responsibility. If you're a platform that you have information on your website, you need to know that all the information is there, that it's transparent, that it's accurate, that it's relevant, robust, and it's of quality. Don't be afraid to say to your clients, I'm not putting that product up on my platform because your information is not good enough. We've got to work collectively at it. And I do want to give credit. They might not be quite there. Sorry, Tim. But, they really are making an effort and they really are trying to make a difference. Personally, I think achieved. I also say to brands and to certification bodies, I don't think there are any grounds on which you shouldn't expect to provide your expert opinion on durability, your technical expert's evaluation on B1. None of this is commercially sensitive. And as a technical expert, if you have got the courage and the confidence in your skills, what have you got to lose by showing people how good a job you've done? So to brands, to all the, and they issue code mark as well, obviously, but to all the code mark suppliers, certifiers, there is no risk to be had by not providing all that information. It's not commercially sensitive. And to the merchants out there, I don't know why you are continuing to supply products that don't have the evidence to support their fit for purpose. I know that Placemakers asks a supplier to sign a document that says it's fit for purpose, but I don't think that's good enough. Every customer that goes into a merchant store should be able to either say, what information have you got? Or should be able to say, where can I get it? The merchants, by actually demanding product suppliers to start giving information, could change things. I'm still on this. You might actually wonder why I'm hammering product suppliers so much. But my view is that all good buildings, whether it's a new building, whether a building consent's required or not, whether it's an alteration, whether it's just maintenance, buildings need good products. So actually product suppliers are the beginning of the chain. Now, obviously, no presentation of mine would be complete without some comment with councils. And some of you may remember me as Louise Cosgrove when I worked for Auckland City. And so I do know what it's like to be a council person. And I look back in some of the things that I did, and there's nothing like standing in the private sector to make you go back to think about how you behaved and would you repeat those things. But I think the thing we need to do is recognise that at the moment, council behaviour is very heavily influenced by litigation lawyers. I find that ironic because a litigation lawyer obviously is a business person and they want their business to grow. Their business will grow with increased building failure and with risk aversion. So they're getting influenced by people that want not to move to a performance-driven construction sector, but actually a fail-driven performance sector, because that's what their business relies on. You might call that cynical, but there we are. This means that councils are going to be cautious to change because ringing in their ear, they've got last man standing, ratepayer liability, and on it goes. So I think they're going to have to be dragged to a performance focus. They won't lead. They are talking about capping liability, that if it's capped at 20%, it'll solve the problem. I don't believe it will, because it will only solve the problem if councils stuck within their box that was their job. But currently they don't. They tell designers how a detail should look. That's not their job. And so the thing is that I don't believe that they're going to lead the change. I think they will come on board over time, but it will take some time. But that doesn't mean that we don't start right now. Leadership will come, but it's got to come from the private sector. And if we adopt the philosophy that we have adopted for kicking COVID-19, I think we can achieve this new look. But, on a company level or an individual level, we've all got to decide that, yep, there are some things we do, and even if councils still behave irritatingly and all the other ways they do, we can still do something, and I'd like to encourage you all to do that. That's me. Thank you.
That's awesome.
I'll stop sharing
you
the
do
screen
that.
when I can work out how to do that.
Now, everyone, we've just put up our brochure, but we can send out the notes from this. Louise, your feed's actually broken up here and there. But
sorry.
I think it's okay. I think we've got the message. I don't think it's a problem. The video will be up later, which will probably still have those, but I think it's fine. If it was really bad, we could re-record it at a later date, but that's fine. Let's get into some of the questions. One was asking about, will council accept, it says these documents came up while you were talking about your pass. So how does the pass work with council?
Well, I think we've now got about 120, and we're getting less questions about them. So by that, we assume that they're starting to be relied upon. And so we're getting more people saying, I want one of those. And certainly when I've travelled around the country, people have said, oh, you do the passes. And this is council people. Oh, you do the passes. Oh, we've heard about them. We wondered who we did. We've had really good feedback from facade engineers about the level of information. And I think the new move to make the information discoverable and to put the QR code will add to the reliance. So it's already one of our passes has already been subject to a determination, and they made a couple of very minor comments. So yeah, I think that it's one of those things that and it's not just about our pass, but as other companies also do their own that have a similar level of quality, that you'll start getting them relied upon. Lots of people recognise the limitations of Codemark and brands appraisals, you see, I think.
Do you want to touch a bit on that? Like, what are some of the pros and cons of Codemark, brands, pass? What works and doesn't work? If I'm a product supplier sitting there with the brands and a Codemark, why would I get a pass? Or if I'm just sitting there with the brands, why would I get a pass?
So in my experience, brands appraisals, the scope is normally set by brands, and it's not actually set by the company. And so you see people relying on a brand's appraisal as much outside the scope as inside the scope. And if we're talking about being performance driven, that's not okay.
Even if we're worrying about liability, that's not ideal.
Well, yeah, I guess the thing is, in terms of cost, it's a relatively expensive tool. I'm not trying to say it doesn't have some value, and I think a brand's appraisal does have value, but I think that's probably for higher value products. Weatherboards, really, you don't need to have a third party appraisal. With respect to Codemark, I've been a fan of Codemark. I was involved in some of the initial policy. I've been involved in training. I've been involved in trying to hold certifiers to account and trying to hold JASANs to account. The quality of the certificates is so poor that unfortunately, I don't think most of them are readable. Maybe 15, 20% are readable. But, as a statutory document that allows you to work out what the scope is and all of that, that's just not a good tool. So, what we say to people with Codemark, still use our executive summary, our pass, because it provides the clarity, and then just use your Codemark as your means of compliance. So a pass is not just a means of compliance, whereas a brand's appraisal and Codemark is. Yeah,
I remember talking to you, and my understanding with the pass was almost coming from with your ex-council hat going on, what's all the information I would require if I was a BCA trying to look at this product, and here it is in one page, or pointing to where I can find it, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why deliberately we keep it to 2 pages. That's plenty long enough.
Now there's one here. Why shouldn't builders be able to rely on products specified by architects as being fit for purpose?
Well, I guess the thing is, when you go in and buy a block of cheese, from the supermarket, you check the use by date. Why doesn't a builder just check? You know, it's just the same. It's not going through all of it. It's just, you know, in our other life, we check things. So all I'm just saying is, in the same way you check the use by date, if you're a builder, you know, take some control for what you're doing. And I can't imagine that somebody would blindly say, well, they've you know, specified this, I'm going to do it. It doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it. You know, we're all professionals.
Yeah, and I like what you've said in the past too around, and you talked about it as well, but in terms of each person being responsible for the bit that they are required to be responsible. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, I guess the thing is, all I can talk about me really is that lots of people say to me, oh, aren't you worried about the liability about, you know, what you do? And I take what I do very seriously, and I absolutely want to do the best I can. And so I'm far more likely to worry at night, have I done a good enough job, as opposed to worrying at night, has it failed? And it's really about how you view what you do. If you're confident that 99% of the time what you do is correct, sure, worry about that 1% from a business perspective. We'll all make mistakes, and that's fine. But if you strive for excellence, then you've got to be able to tolerate the odd failure. But the thing is, if you're still striving for excellence, that odd failure will only be very odd, not systemic. We shouldn't get carried away by leaky buildings. It was a perfect storm, and it wasn't the builder's fault.
What happened to producer statements? Where does that fit into this?
So producer statements are a piece of paper that somebody who has been pre-approved by the council says the job is going to comply with the building code. They have no legal standing. Half the time you wouldn't even know what they relate to, because you know, so you might have a waterproofing membrane installer who gives you a PS3 for having installed the membrane, and there's 3 different types of membrane on the site. You don't know which one it is. Personally, I don't hold much by producer statements. That, you know, again, that's death by checking rather than value add. Does a producer statement add value? Not in my view. Could do, but it doesn't.
Do you think code markers still fit for purpose after recent events? I'm not quite sure what they're referring to, but
in its current model, no, I don't think it is. It could be, but I don't think it is. I think the changes to the regulation about what's got to require, you know, in many ways the process is okay usually. But the documentation of it, the certificate, is at the end of the day what we all judge it on. And writing those certificates is really hard. Kevin, my business partner, and I would often help a certification body. And, you know, for one page, it might take collectively 20 hours. The quality of the certificates and now what you've got to include is just so cumbersome. You know, I don't think anybody would be able to understand a certificate. So no, I think the regulations are a bit disappointing, to be fair.
So most suppliers' literature contains a proof of compliance, but many are hidden amongst far too many words and have a long list of disclaimers. So for builders and designers to have confidence to stand behind something, they need to understand more and to understand it in a simple format. Does the past supply simplicity?
Personally, I think it does. You know, it's taken us about 6 years to get to where we are, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And I think, yes, it does. Absolutely.
Is it?
And I agree with the point about too many pages.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is interesting in your reflection on a code mark, because a code mark on the surface is actually a very simple document. And as far as the industry trying to use it, to me, it's like, yep, it's a bit of paper. If it's got code mark, we don't have to look into all the details as long as we check the, you know, which things it's designed for. But I don't think people are doing that checking necessarily, but it should be that robust, shouldn't it?
Well, no, but the other interesting thing is the only people that legally are entitled to rely on a code mark and legally have to is a building consent authority, and they may only rely on it providing all conditions are met. Many of the certificates, you wouldn't know what the conditions are. So I actually think that whenever in the event they ever end up in a court of law, then they're not going to be able to rely on them, because I do know or rely. Sorry, what's that?
Yep, you're right.
That the reliance on a code mark is still subject to due diligence.
Yeah. Is it time to have large building companies who self-certify and have no council inspections and private inspections to private companies? Oh, sorry, and have private insurance to private companies?
The law already allows that, because if you were to read the definition of plans and specifications in the Building Act, it also includes the proposed inspection regime. So there is nothing to stop for any person when they lodge a building consent application saying this is the approach we want to take. And we've used that successfully with some clients, actually.
Huh. If the New Zealand Building Code is a minimum standard, what standards are optimum, and how do we raise those building standards?
A statement. It's not dissimilar to most other building codes in the world that basically says it's got to be weather tight and that it can't fall over. You know, I think the thing is, because it's not quantified, it's not really a standard, the building code. So, you know, it's a difficult one to say, because the building code, is just, if I think about it, if you've got things that says you've got adequate space to store food, there's a building code clause that talks about adequate space to store food. Well, how do you quantify that? It depends how many, and I remember working for, when I worked for Auckland City, we used those sort of clauses to prevent the construction of a tall building that was going to have 45 square metre apartments in it, but then I think they got around it another way.
Yeah. It is interesting, and I think this kind of comes back to the whole point of your conversation around, actually, in some ways we shouldn't be worrying about the building code as a minimum spec, because we should be trying to build the best building with the best products that are out there, not just the ones that just meet code, right?
Absolutely, and if we can start getting the ducks in a row, the place where I think that we need to look at reducing costs is what I call hidden compliance costs. So it's not the building consent fee per se, but it's all these producer statements, it's the time, and it's the churn, and it's all that sort of thing. If you've got really good documentation, you give to councils exactly what they require, then you can stand the moral high ground and say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if enough of us start doing it, you will get change.
I'm just going to read this one out because it's a follow-up to a previous one. And I found it a little bit interesting because on one hand, I completely understand with them. And then on the other hand, I go, maybe this is the whole kind of part of the problem with what we're dealing with. So with that comment, with regards to builders checking what the architect has specified, you open a can of worms, as I understand it, that if you change it, then you run foul of the whole consenting process. The council is the one who's being contracted to provide the correct material, is being used in the correct form and installed correctly. And it's an interesting thing because on one hand I go, yep, that's how it should be. And then on the other hand, I go, this is part of the struggle, is it's a finger pointing exercise. And,
so first of all, the council isn't in a contract. So the term that says the council's been contracted to do X, Y, and Z, they're not. They're only liable under negligence. So they're not liable under contract for a start off. In fact, their liability is the easiest to manage. So they just need to establish on reasonable grounds that if you do something according to plans and specifications, it'll meet the performance requirements of the code. So contractually, a council has no contractual obligation. However, yes, there is a thing about substituting products. And again, and there's been a determination that we were involved in around substantially similar products. And so if, for instance, they have specified weatherboard manufactured by company A and you want to use it by company B, then basically all it is just a note that you do on site, that because they're identical, they're commodity products. What you do find in actual fact is that one of the problems is you'll get a consent issued with a whole load of products, then it will go out to tender and all the products get changed. And I accept that that becomes a kind of a disjoint. But, you know, that's when you were, you know, listening to Grant in that last week, then that is about some teamwork so that you don't operate all in silos. It's manageable, but you've got to have some sort of continuity and think about what you're doing. Because let's say an architect has thought carefully about how the building as a system is going to operate. If you then change from one particular product to a dissimilar sort of product, then yes, you do need to think about the impact of that on the performance of the building as a system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that this is the challenge is this. I mean, the difficulty with leaky building is the cost was so massive that there is such a level of fear. And so I think that's what is driving this kind of antagonistic relationship between the builder and the architect, because neither of them want to be responsible for each other's decisions. But what we're not always seeing is common ground. Let's work together. Hey, I'd really like to use this product for this reason. Let's talk about it together, as opposed to I'm changing what you said to do and now it's going to become my liability. And you know,
yeah, but hold on, don't forget though that you say I'd like to use this product, here's their assurance statement and I'm confident it's going to work. Straight away you've changed the whole risk profile, because don't forget, in actual fact, sometimes there are contractual disputes, obviously, but if you remember leaky building claims, they were all bought under negligence. Not one of them was under contract. And so in actual fact, all the reason why people were found liable was because they were found to be negligent. Now, if you can say, I changed from this product to this product, my decision-making was based on this suite of information, that, you know, how can you be shown to be negligent? You know, let's really think about where risk arises, not from a building failing, but from being negligent. And if you're not negligent, you know, and if you do the checks through the way, it's not going to fail.
I think architects and designers should take responsibility for the specification of materials and products. So I haven't pre-read this one, but this should not need to be verified by the builder, because then becomes their responsibility and blurs the lines. I think, okay, it's more of the same.
Well, hey, listen, whether or not they verify it, it's still their responsibility, because you will find that every architect will not use every single product, will not specify every single product. And if you're going to go on site and charge a reasonable amount of money and you're going to use products without thinking about whether they're good, bad or indifferent, and in fact not even caring, then I don't know why you're in business, because you're not a hunter, you're a hunted.
There's a lot of frustration at the BCAs. What do you think would be something the BCAs could do to improve the situation we have?
Stop listening to litigation lawyers and in actual fact start thinking about success.
What would that look like though? What would they be doing differently?
Well, I think they would, first of all, they could define what reasonable grounds means, and then they could define what they were going to rely on. Years ago, I created this tool called the reliance model, and I did it for MB, and went and spoke to a barrister they used. And if councils were to employ the reliance model, their liability would go down to zero. And so basically what that would require is that they would rely on what the designer or architect provides. And if it's not enough, they wouldn't bypass the architect and go straight to the product supplier, they'd go back to the designer and say, we still can't work that. But, you know, councils design things, they approve things. All they've got to do is establish on reasonable grounds something will work. The best thing they could do is actually understand what their job is.
Yeah. Well, okay, well, that's awesome. I think it's interesting. There's more questions coming in. There's still, I mean, a lot of frustration in the space. So you are tapping onto probably one of the sorest points in the industry. And I suspect we could keep going all day and we'd potentially go around in circles. But
Can I just say one thing? Like, I know the frustration. Hey, I've experienced it myself. You know, I've just about wanted to hit someone. And I guess that I'm saying is that, you know, this isn't going to be a quick fix, but unless we start, we will never get to the end of the tunnel. And that's all I'm saying is that, you know, if nothing else happens, apart from suppliers starting to provide, you know, documents to support that their products are fit for purpose, then the rest of us can't do the changes. So really, if I was trying to send out a message, it would be to suppliers and the merchants, is why have you got products on the market, whether it's an architect or whether it's a builder or whether it's the BCA, can't use.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm kind of grateful for your approach. And, you know, I know from a product supplier's perspective, it can be a frustrating and expensive process when you feel like you've done all the work and the testing yourself to kind of assure yourself that it's going to work. And then your next question is, how do we make sure council's happy? And then how do we make sure that architects are going to be happy and specify? And yeah, I appreciate what you're doing with the past and trying to simplify, but still be really, really robust. And appreciate your experience and your thoughts and having taken the time today. So
thanks for having me. That's great. Awesome. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks again, guys. Now, you just pop your camera off, Louise.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's us, guys. We set out to do 4 episodes through lockdown. That's what we've done. We've had such an awesome uptake and so much engagement with the industry. Clearly, we want to do more. We're looking at what the next part of this conversation looks like and what the format looks like as we all end up back at work and kind of under pressure to deliver. But this conversation that started is worthwhile and there's more to be done. But what's great is that there might be some other formats that we can start using and some different ways that we can start doing this. We will keep doing some webinars, and we will also look at maybe some shorter formats that are easier to watch throughout a busier day, and we might throw those into a podcast format as well. But hey, we appreciate you being with us. You know, all the best as you kind of enter back out to that crazy world. I hope everybody finds a way to do it safely, but also really get some productivity going and keep this industry rocking along as much as we possibly can. So just on behalf of High Performer Building, thanks for being with us, and we look forward to staying engaged with you as we move forward. Cheers.